Well, you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2, and we are on location in New York City for Book Expo America, which is the publishing industry's annual convention held at the Javits Convention Center. And here on our Book TV set, we're pleased to be joined by two publishers. Susan Weinberg is the publisher of Public Affairs, and Marji Ross is president of Regnery Publishing. We wanted to talk with them about some of the books that they have coming up this season. And Susan Weinberg, if we could start with Don Bartlett and James Steele's new book.
The Betrayal of the American Dream is a book that is written by probably the premier team of investigative reporters still working in America today. And Bartlett and Steele, as they are well known, have among them won 2 Pulitzer Prizes as well as 2 National Magazine Awards, and they even have an award named after them that's given out in journalism today. They worked first at the Philadelphia Inquirer and then Time Magazine and now at Vanity Fair. They have been tracing this story really since the 1980s. And they take the drumbeat of the economic news we're hearing, jobs, incomes, pensions, and they really give you the context to put that news in. So you don't see these stories as isolated events. You really see these stories in the context of what has happened in the economy and to the middle class over a long period of time. And you get the cumulative effect of policy decisions, of things Congress have done, of things companies have done and been allowed to do. So you really read the news and think about the elections, both I think on the local and national level, in a different way when you see the full story and the picture that they paint. And there's one in the chapter on the end of retirement. There's a particularly very astute phrase when they quoted an actuarian who said, you know, if the operations side of the business were run according to the same laws as the pension funds, people would go to jail. And we're talking about what has happened to pensions in America and how 401ks were meant to supplement retirement. Do you know that the median value of a 401k in America right now is $17,000? And they, you know, at the end of the book, they have a phrase, I hope I can recollect it correctly, but it really struck me. And they basically said, you know, we really have to support our greatest asset because without a middle class, there really is no America.
When is that book being published?
This book is coming out in the middle of the summer. It will be out right at the beginning of August before each of the political conventions.
Marji Ross, is The Betrayal of the American Dream by Bartlett and Steele, is that a book that Regnery would publish?
Well, it's interesting. It might well be in terms of this question that people have about where the country is going, whether or not the middle class can continue to exist. I think that's an issue that crosses party lines. And the solution to that problem may be quite different, whether you're asking somebody from the right or from the left. But I think the problem is pretty generally accepted in terms of, you know, whether or not people have the opportunity to move up, whether they have the opportunity to improve their lives, their future, and the future for their children and their grandchildren. And those are issues that, you know, frankly, the Tea Party has spent a lot of time talking about. And so from that vantage point, I think this question of the American dream and the middle class is one that's really very important to everyone and probably pretty important to the upcoming election.
Regnery has the #1 book right now.
We do.
The Amateur, Ed Klein.
That's right. We're very excited. Ed Klein wrote a terrific book, very insightful, a lot of shocking new information. He conducted more than 200 in-person interviews and uncovered a lot of interesting and surprising information, often from people who had supported Barack Obama in 2008, who had given him money, contributed to his campaign, worked very hard to get him elected, believed very much in the promise of hope and change and the things that he had said on the campaign trail. And what Ed found was a surprisingly common and repeated theme among the people he talked to, which was like him, don't like him, agree with him, don't agree with him. The common thread was that he was in over his head, that this was just a job that was too big for him, that he wasn't prepared for, and that his personality and combined with his experience or lack thereof added up to a pretty disastrous first term and the moniker of the amateur. One of our common threads in our office was talking about comparing Obama to other presidents, and a lot of people had said, well, Ronald Reagan was the great communicator and Bill Clinton was the natural. And Ed Klein said, and Barack Obama may well go down in history as the amateur.
When I look at some of the upcoming titles from Regnery, is it fair to say they're all anti-Obama books?
It is fair to say that they are all arguing that he does not deserve to be reelected for one reason or another, talking about a variety of different issues. I think that would be definitely fair to say.
Well, when you look at The Betrayal of the American Dream by Public Affairs and The Amateur by Regnery, do you hope your books influence public opinion and public policy, Susan Weinberg?
You know, I think you do. We talk about our books being part of the national conversation. But I think, you know, when Marji said that The Betrayal of the American Dream, the themes in that are not just, you know, Republican and Democratic themes, I think that's very true. And that book doesn't argue for a particular candidate. It argues for people to see the context, see the issues, and really get involved and think about what's going on in a more informed way. And that's why I said I think they would hope it would affect elections, not just the presidential election, but on all the different levels, because people are making policy on all kinds of different levels that affect people's lives.
You know, in a lot of ways it's interesting. Our books end up complementing rather than contradicting, in that a lot of the books by Public Affairs raises issues and doesn't necessarily take a particularly partisan point of view, doesn't really advocate as much as try to educate and inform. And it's certainly true that for Regnery, our books are much more likely to take a position to be written by an author who may be very well known by our audience, but also is pretty passionate about his or her point of view. And in the end, I think the combination can be really beneficial. No matter what you believe, hearing someone who is very passionate about their point of view, and then supplementing that as well with someone who is an expert in a particular policy area and may be able to provide a lot of information, a lot of data, and allow you to make up your own mind.
Well, let's move a little bit off policy for a minute, and this is a new title coming out by Public Affairs. Susan Weinberg, what were you thinking?
You know, this is a book of what I call serious fun. And Ascent of the A Word, Assholism, the First 60 Years, is by Jeffrey Numberg. We've done quite a few books with Jeff, and he is a linguist, a professor at UC Berkeley. He's the former chair of usage at the American Heritage Dictionary, and he's done a lot of commentary on Fresh Air, radio, New York Times, other papers. And so he's been a cultural observer for quite a few years. And he has written some books like Talking Right that were more politically informed. And this book is really a social history of a vulgarity. The rise of this word, what does it mean about us? What does it say about us? And, you know, Trollope's time, you might have said that cat. And we think about J.D. Salinger's Holden Caulfield, and we think about phonies. Well, when you think about this word, which was introduced to American culture by Norman Mailer in The Naked and the Dead in 1948, and he picked it up as a term that GIs were using, troops in Europe. And people are, first of all, surprised that it's that recent. Its prevalence has grown from that recent a time. And there's no question that it has certain kinds of meanings and connotations in our personal lives, in our cultural lives, and in our political lives. And I don't want to try to get into each of his arguments in that. I'm going to say read the book for that, but it's really a lot of fun and quite delicious. And it starts with you know, Norman Mailer and ends by invoking Immanuel Kant.
Susan Weinberg, did you pick the title of that book, or did Mr. Numberg?
You know, Mr. Numberg picked the title, and he very, very deliberately chose not to use the word in the title, and he's got a great piece at the end of his introduction on why he did that.
Marji Ross.